everybody, and welcome to NAAE's monthly webinar series. My name is Judy Browse, and I'm the Executive Director of NAAEE, and so happy that all of you could join us. We have a big crowd today, which is great because our webinar today is about connecting people to nature and from caring to conservation and more. And we have three wonderful panelists, and you're going to love this. And we really couldn't have a better lineup. As many of you know, NAAEE hosts a monthly webinar series to bring new ideas and thinking to the field and to showcase leaders who are working in environmental education and related fields, because we want to improve our own practice and also encourage new thinking across all the work that we all do. And I am so excited to announce a partnership with the U.S. Forest Service called eeINSPIRE, and we love the logo with the Big Dipper there. It's a series of webinars that we are doing in partnership with the Forest Service to hit on topics that are of special interest to the Forest Service employees, but also to everybody else in the environmental ed field. So it's very exciting that we can add these to our monthly webinar activities. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Heidi McAllister, who is the Assistant Director of Conservation Education for the Forest Service. And she is as someone who has done so much for the field of environmental education throughout her career. We love working with her, and she's going to come and say a few words. So Heidi.
Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us for eeINSPIRE. As Judy said, a joint effort of NAAEE and the USDA Forest Service. We're so happy that you could join us. We're thrilled to be able to bring the latest and greatest of professional development to the Forest Service community across the nation and to everyone else who is able to join us today. Some of you will remember that we started with a survey of Forest Service employees, and 134 of you responded. So that really tells us that there's a great interest out there for this information. So we're really excited to have been able to choose your topics and bring those to you through the webinar series. We're also thrilled that we have almost 450 people registered. Was that correct? As
over 500.
Over 500. Now you see I was wrong. Over 500 people registered for the webinar series. So we're really thrilled with that, and it really shows how much interest there is and how much a need there is for this information. So we're really glad you're here. We're also just thrilled to be working with NAAEE, who's the perfect partner to bring all of our field staff, just the top talent in environmental education, to bring to bear on all of the issues that we face and the programming that we do. So we're really, really excited about today's panelists and future panelists as well. And I'm not going to spill the beans on that, but we have some really wonderful things lined up for you. We have designed this webinar series for our partners as well as our staff to participate. So Forest Service employees, invite your partners, have them on. We know a lot of them are already on today. Spread the word wide. We want them to be able to take advantage of this professional development as well. So do that. As part of the professional development aspect of this series, we're also designing a series of worksheets, optional worksheets that we will provide after each webinar for you just to focus in on the specific aspects of that particular webinar and see if you can really figure out how to put the things that you've learned to work at your particular sites. So we're excited about that as well. The webinars will of course all be archived. So for those of you, if you know people who are not able to make it today and on the other live webinars, tell them they're archived and share that information with them, please. We'd love to have them join us at a later date. And with that, again, we're really excited and happy to be here, happy to have all of our wonderful panelists, and I will turn it back to Judy.
Thanks, Heidi. So happy we could be doing this together. And I also want to thank all of our affiliate co-hosts who are working with NAAEE to sponsor the monthly webinar series. Thanks to all of you for promoting this and to all our Forest Service friends. And if you're not connected to your state affiliate, I encourage you to find out more about what they're up to. Before we get started, very quickly, the best way to interact with us is through the chat room, because everybody is muted because we have so many people online. So please send chats to us at any time, and you can send them to an individual, to all the panelists, or to everyone just using the drop down. And you're also welcome to type in questions at any time throughout the whole webinar, as well as put in your own links or own resources. This is an opportunity for all of us to learn from each other. And if you do have any technical problems, which we hope you don't, you can message Kristen or Colby using the Zoom chat box. Both of them are amazing. Kristen is the manager of our research programs and the lead on our NOAA relationship, and she is the webinar guru. And Colby is our communication specialist and social media specialist, and we're really happy to have them both on supporting this. So thank you both. And just wanted to mention that, of course, connecting people to nature is a big part of what NAAEE is all about. It's been integral to, the nature connection is integral to the field of environmental education. And we are doing so many different things. I just wanted to highlight a couple of things, and then we'll introduce our speakers. We are working on a guidebook that is designed to help practitioners measure and improve nature connections. And we're working with Martha Monroe at the University of Florida, and so many other partners. And I think this is going to be a great tool, and Lauren's going to talk more about that at the end. We also have EE Works, where we're trying to demonstrate the value and impact of environmental education and going theme by theme. We're doing reviews of the research and talking about what the value is and what the research says. And the next one that's coming out is going to look at nature connections in early childhood and beyond, and we'll keep you posted. And finally, we also have, of course, the Natural Start Alliance, which is a network of organizations and early childhood educators and parents who are trying to connect young people to nature through education and opportunities to spend time outside. So all of this is on our website, and Colby and Kristen will be putting some links into the chat room. So we're so excited that you could all join, and our speakers are fantastic. So I'm going to introduce them one by one. And what we're going to do is Louise will start off, and I'm going to introduce her in a minute. Then at the end, after Louise talks, we'll take a few questions for Louise specifically. Then we'll move on to Sheila. Of course, this isn't in the right order, just to mess you all up. And then we will, last but not least, hear from Lauren. So it's a really wonderful lineup. And after each speaker, you'll have a chance to ask them specific questions. And then at the end, you'll have a chance to ask additional questions to all three panelists. We probably won't get to all the questions, but we'll do our best, and we'll answer whatever we can't later on and post it on EE Pro. And as Heidi said, there'll be a recording of this webinar so that you can go back and take another look, and also take a look at anything that you missed along the way. So now I am so excited to introduce our first speaker, Louise Chawla. Many of you know Louise's work, and I think one of the highlights of my career has been getting to know and work with her. She is absolutely fantastic. For those of you who don't know her, she is a professor emerita in the program in environmental design at the University of Colorado Boulder. She was previously the associate director of the Children, Youth, and Environment Center, and she is now a community engagement design and research fellow, or CEDAR fellow. As a member of the executive committee of Growing Up Boulder, she helps lead a partnership between CEDAR and the Boulder Valley School District and the City of Boulder to integrate the ideas of children and youth into urban planning and design. And as the international coordinator of the Growing Up in Cities program of UNESCO from 1996 to 2006, she revived an initiative that has involved young people in cities around the world in evaluating and improving their urban communities. She's written a ton, 3 books, many, many book chapters, journal articles on children and nature, children in cities, and the development of active care for the natural world. And previously, she was the co-editor of the journal Children, Youth, and Environments. And most recently, she is the co-author of the book Placemaking with Children and Youth, Participatory Practices for Planning Sustainable Communities. She is one of the kindest and most thoughtful research gurus I've ever worked with. Let's give a warm virtual welcome to Louise.
All right, well, thank you, Judy. I hope I can live up to that. So I'm going to focus on the research side of nature connection. And so we can move on to okay, good. So the idea of nature connection, of course, goes way back. It goes back to the beginning of recorded history. We can find it in literature and art, clear that people are thinking about their relationship to nature, thinking about it, feeling it, expressing it in different ways. And it's very deep. Back up. It's very deep in American history, of course, and with transcendentalism, Henry David Thoreau, Emerson, our landscape painters, that whole tradition. So it's a strong part of our American heritage. As a distinct research topic, however, it's actually quite new. And I've included a list of resources. It's just an entry into what is actually quite a large research literature, but you'll have that with your worksheets. And it shows that there's been a steep increase from very few studies that were expressly about nature connection until about 2010, and then really taking off, and we see this rapid rise in research on about nature connection now. So of course, for researchers, the first question is, how do we define it? So let's move on and look at the different dimensions of how it is defined. There's agreement in the research field that it's multidimensional. It's really about that more both emotional, cognitive, experiential side of our lives that really motivate us in our relationship with nature. And so emotion is a strong part, and these are the kind of emotions that researchers have been looking at. They're looking at it in two ways. There's a lot of quantitative research out there that has developed measures, and Judy talked about this effort underway now to make these measures more accessible to people in the field, to help guide people through the variety of measures that are there. So there is this quantitative approach, and then you look at, so you have questions for people in surveys about how they're related to nature, and some are about this emotional side. And then people doing qualitative research have gone to these and said, okay, if those of you in the field doing quantitative measures are looking at these different dimensions, then how can we look at these same dimensions through observing people and talking with them and getting them to express their feelings through nature and writing and art. And but so there's an agreement, whether it's qualitative research or quantitative research, that emotions about nature are a core part of nature connection. Next. And experiential. Do people enjoy being out in nature? Do they feel comfortable there? And many people talk about feeling calm and peace in nature, or restoration or solace. It's a great place to go when you're not feeling so good and you want to feel better. A lot of people talk about that. And then there is a cognitive side. There's a side of understanding. And this is not so much about knowledge, that would be measured differently, but a basic understanding about our interdependence with the natural world, and that our lives, our survival, our quality of life relies on it. At the same time, it's vulnerable, it can be harmed by us, and it's important for us to protect it. So that's the cognitive side of nature connection. And then areas of discussion, but really rich discussion. So some researchers argue that if you're connected to nature, you're going to take care of it. And that this is an intrinsic part of what nature connection means. And then others say, well, yes, if you feel connected to nature, you'll want to take care of it, but do people actually go out and do those conservation behaviors? And so they've taken that research path of saying, well, let's see if these are connected. And what they find is that they're very highly connected. That people's levels of nature connection are very predictive of whether or not they're going to be taking environmental action in a variety of different ways, and a variety of measures have been used looking at different kinds of conservation behaviors, and they are highly connected. It's more highly connected than knowledge about nature. And that does not mean that knowledge is not important. Of course, it's very important, but it's not a motivator with the strength that nature connection is, because nature connection has those different dimensions, including that emotional dimension. And so it turns out to be really strongly linked to action for the environment as a motivator. And then in the research with young children, there's a similar discussion with empathy. Is empathy an intrinsic part of nature connection in young children? And remember, young children see the world. Often they see the world as alive. They see natural landscapes as living, and plants and animals as sentient and having feelings. And then other researchers say, well, it's not exactly the same thing as nature connection, this empathy for living things. But again, it's so closely connected. And in fact, research does show that it is. Okay, next. So the people who work with young children, and I'm sure Sheila will have much more to say about this, rather than seeing the children's tendency to see whole landscapes as alive and plants as sensitive, rather than dismissing that as childish, I think you can actually link it with a lot of emerging research and science that shows, in fact, how the elements of the natural world are responsive and interdependent, and that's the way we want to go with young children. So how does nature connection form? Well, the number one thing that emerges in the research is time. Spending time in nature, having positive experiences in nature, that's the big one. And then some research where researchers have also looked at other factors, find that family values of care for nature are very important too. And then beyond families, mentors as well. And that predicts childhood nature connection. Next. And then adult nature connection. Well, if you didn't get those positive experiences in nature in childhood, research is showing that if you have those positive experiences out in nature now as an adult, that encourages the development of nature connection. And if you had it as a child, that's going to really deepen your nature connection as an adult. But people can become connected to nature at all ages, childhood and adulthood. And these are also connected to whether or not people go seeking the natural world for play when they're children or for recreation as adults. So if you want people out using your spaces, encourage nature connection, and it motivates, again, ongoing search for the natural world as a place to go to. So how do we encourage nature connection? And I'll close with this part. On the resources that I sent you, you'll see a number of studies that are specifically related to this. There are evaluations of programs that had the goal of encouraging nature connection, and descriptions of those programs, so you can see more details, but I'll try to touch on some of the big aspects of programs. First of all, the good news is that, and let's go back one first. The good news is that programs that offer opportunities for nature connection, it does have a result. We have a number of studies show that people's levels of nature connection do rise as a consequence of having experiences. And again, because time in nature is so core to nature connection, making access to nature convenient, accessible to people is a basic strategy. And even in urban areas, green schoolyards, green the areas around childcare centers, make the areas around libraries and other public institutions places for enjoying nature and where children can play and discover nature. Just think about all the opportunities you have to bring nature where people are. Okay. And then it could go without saying, but people can easily forget. If these are the dimensions of nature connection, then focus on providing those experiences in your programs. So look at those dimensions of nature connection, which I showed you before and are on this screen again, and think very deliberately, how can I create opportunities for these kinds of experiences for people? Okay. Start young. There are a number of studies that show that children are, their younger children are particularly responsive to programs and the effects in terms of measures, long-term measures of their nature connection last longer. Adolescents, the social world is so important to them, and that's often what they're paying attention to, even when they're out in nature. But that, again, that doesn't mean every age is responsive to opportunities to be in nature, but do think about starting young whenever you can. Offer immersive experiences. So a whole day program is better than a couple hours. Or repeated hours over a period of weeks. But try to think about how you can get people out in nature. And again, it could be their school ground, but where you give them time to be there and experience it and take it in, and give them activities to do that encourages them to notice things and kind of have their space there to do that. So give people time. Do not overprogram. It's more important to give people some time to choose areas and just get to enjoy them and connect with them in their own way, following their own interests. Nature, I think of it like a marriage broker. You can kind of decide you two make a good combination, like you and nature, but you can't make those sides fall in love. You have to give them time to be with each other. You have to give people time to fall in love with nature in their own pace, in their own way. And so really think about providing for those moments for people to just experience nature in their own chosen way. And remember, with children, enjoyment often takes the form of adventurous, full-bodied movement. If it's risky, that can really heighten the enjoyment. So allow for manageable risk. And like this picture, for example, I'm showing of the little boys in a nature program in a school district right near mine. And the woman who took this picture said he jumped the ditch 15 times with that kind of joy and vigor before he was ready to run over and find a new area to explore. So with young children, remember that enjoyment often, and with teens as well, enjoyment often takes this form. Okay. And one back? Okay. really important to close on, and there are a number of studies that show this. An really important way to deepen nature connection is give people authentic activities to care for wildlife and natural habitats, where it's not like just make work, but they feel that they're part of a collective effort to protect wild animals or plants or natural habitats. And they feel they've been invited to be part of that larger collective effort, and it's real and it's authentic and it's about their local region and their local places. And that's really critical from early childhood up. Children really respond to that, and we have some wonderful research that shows that. And I will close on that note.
Louise, thank you so much. We do have a lot of questions for you. How about if we take 2 right now, and then we'll see what we have at the end. Ruth Wilson asked if the type of nature makes a difference in fostering nature connection. Any thoughts on that?
Well, you raise an important question, Ruth, which is that, yes, if you go around the world, people are even from place to place within the same city, people have very different opportunities for access to nature, different types of nature that are available to them. And we start with where we are. I mean, I think you're familiar with it, Ruth, Tanya Subko's research in Hong Kong, looking at nature connection development with young children. And you begin with what you have. And if it's local parks, she gives the example even of crickets in a cage, which is part of the Chinese culture for children to care for. It's very different than being out there in wild nature, but it shows that children are responsive to that. I mean, children connect with even small things. And yes, it's going to be different kinds of nature in different places, but we just want to provide those nature experiences wherever and however we can.
Great, Louise, that's a wonderful response. And 2 more quick things that maybe you can just respond to, and then some of our other panelists might address them. Any tips for connecting adolescents in particular to nature? And that's from Kendall. And Elaine O'Sullivan was asking, what do you do about parents who are afraid of ticks and bees and all the stuff in nature that gives them pause?
Yeah. It is very important to work with parents too. That feeling comfortable in nature is one of the dimensions of nature connection. And then just, show people how do you manage, we're talking about manageable risks, how do you manage that? But, one of the references that I provided for you is by Cho and Lee in Singapore. And it starts with children's fear of bees. And then takes them through a series of programs where they learn more and more about bees and get involved in hands-on ways. And by the end of it, they move from biophobia to biophilia. So again, people are responsive to programs. And with adolescents, there's the reference I have here by Stefan Timer and Julie Ernst of looking at different fish and wildlife programs has some great examples with teenagers, middle school and high school, of again, giving them those immersive experiences in nature and enabling them to take part in those larger collective efforts where they really play responsible roles. Or one young person called it freedom with responsibility, where they're given tasks in caring for wildlife or wildlife restoration, and they're really trusted, to do their roles, and that's very meaningful to them.
Thanks, Louise. And we'll have more as we keep going here. And then we'll circle back to everybody with questions at the end. Thanks again for all of your questions. And Louise, thanks for kicking this off. I now would like to introduce our second speaker, another brilliant, thoughtful leader and such a great person to have on this webinar because of her experience and expertise in connecting young people to nature, and also her passion for good education. And that's Sheila Williams-Ridge. And she is just a joy to work with. She is the director of the Shirley Moore Laboratory School. She began her career in early childhood education as a business manager for a nature-based preschool program. She has a degree in biology as well as a master's in education, and she started working as a preschool teacher naturalist in 2002. Sheila's passionate about encouraging and promoting nature-based and outdoor play and education with children and adults, and she believes that the relationship with nature is essential to child development and has lasting social, emotional, and behavioral benefits. Her research interests include the benefits of nature-based play, child-directed curriculum, and the effects of nature play in child and adolescent behavior. She's also a certified trainer for the Minnesota Center for Professional Development, a facilitator for the NAAEE Nature Interest Forum, a member of the Nature-Based Learning Research Network, and an adjunct instructor at Hamline University. And lucky for us at NAAEE, she's also a founding member of the Natural Start Alliance board and has served as a co-chair for the Natural Start Conference. She's also the co-author of a new book called Nature-Based Learning for Young Children, Anytime, Anywhere, and on any budget. So please welcome Sheila to the webinar. Hello, Sheila.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to talk about one of my favorite things to talk about, which is conservation and stewardship, but in a developmentally appropriate way for young children. So you could just move along with the slides as you would like. This is one of my favorite quotes. It's actually hanging right outside my office. And we at the lab school really want to make sure that we give children time to study nature, both for its cognitive benefits, but also for its wellness and just the joy of being outside. So the Shirley G. Moore Laboratory School is in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And so we're just across the bridge or across the Mississippi River from downtown Minneapolis. So we have a lot of urban places that we can explore, but we also have a lot of nature nearby. So slow down just a little bit on the slides. Sorry, I'm not controlling the slide. So, okay. And one of the new ventures is I'm working with is the Minneapolis Nature Preschool. It's located on the north side of Minneapolis, and it is really focused on meeting the needs of families on the north side and helping children explore nature in their own neighborhood, especially very young children starting at 3. So I want to talk a little bit about the dual benefits for children and for nature, about the nature connection, because when children get a chance to spend time in nature, like Louise was talking about, that time is so important. They become good observers and they notice change. And they also start to notice things like cause and effect, which as adults we know that can be hard sometimes to convince adults about the cause and effect of their actions. And by giving children enough time while they're young, they're able to do that on their own. Okay, next slide. And then when children are able to do it with others, they are forming those connections in their community. So they're doing it in this photo. These two boys watched this snail for 20 minutes or so. I mean, it's a small snail. It took a long time to move across that bench, but they're sharing the connection and they're sharing stories. They share hypotheses and the excitement of being in nature. And it also helps them focus and gain a deeper understanding. Okay, next. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the benefits for young children. There's a growing body of research, like Louise mentioned, about the physical and mental benefits, social emotional benefits, as well as cognitive development. So I think the next slide is going to show a little bit more. These are some pictures of children exploring nature fully. And it really gives them a chance to learn about the wider world, but also learn about themselves. So here's just a little snippet of some of the research benefits that researchers across the world have been finding with nature-based play. Especially just spending time outside and how it can enhance creativity, academic benefits, but also things like engagement in the classroom, which in the early grades can be really important because that sets the foundation for children being excited learners. And that's what we really want to have, is children who are excited to learn something new, who are excited to be in the classroom, and who want to be in school. It has great mental and emotional health benefits. And then just attending to things like attention and short-term memory and executive function skills are also solidified and enhanced by time in nature. Okay, next slide. Like Judy mentioned, I work with the National Association for the Education of Young Children as one of its facilitators, and they are really focusing on ways to encourage the development of very young children. Birth to 3rd grade is generally the age that NAAEE works with, and so they developed a position statement that says being outside and having children engage with nature is good for their overall development. And that was a picture of my girls on a frozen pond playing hockey. That's the way that they like to engage with the outdoors. And so because of these benefits, families are really excited to have their children participate in nature-based programs. And that can be at parks, museums, zoos, but growingly also nature-based preschools and forest kindergartens. And so families want all of these cognitive and social emotional benefits for their young children. And then there are universities like the University of Minnesota, but also Antioch, Hamline University, Prescott College, and others that are adding courses and certification for people who want to design curriculum and design programming for early childhood. All right, so I just want to talk about some of the benefits to nature and children being engaged in it. And these are some of my favorite pictures. The little girl on the right was in my class a few years ago, and that's my snake Ramona. And her mom wasn't so sure about this. And someone asked a question about, what do you do, excuse me, when adults aren't very sure about whether it's them getting muddy or being exposed to ticks. And children are really adventurous. And so, and sometimes they're not. And so making sure that you are there for the children and allowing for time for risk and time to explore things, but also planning for things ahead of time. So I would have a sign on the door that said, Ramona is out. That way adults that were uncomfortable with that would know that she was gonna be somewhere in the space. And then also caring for their feelings. So by caring about if families are anxious or fearful or excited about something, that they know that you care about them and that you'll work with them. All right, so you can go to the next one. Children will gain a deeper understanding for animals, but also for insects, other bugs, as long as we give them the time. Some children are really excited about this, and some just want to, put gloves on or poke it with a stick. And as teachers, we can allow for that, and as other professionals, making sure that those are options that you have in your program. Okay. And then other benefits like understanding and positive attitudes towards plants, and especially food, is one that I think has so many benefits for young children. When they garden and when they participate in making food, they're more likely to eat it, and they're more likely to eat things that are nutritious. And so research also supports that, which I think is really wonderful, but also the learning and the excitement about what happens in the life cycle and what happens when, something is no longer alive and that plants are alive. And there are so many exciting things that children can discover when they're given the time. And then just that overall connection with the outdoors, that joy that Louise talked about, it looks different in early childhood. It can look calm sometimes, but it also can look very exciting and messy. And so making sure that we allow for children to engage in lots of different ways with their surroundings and plan for that with their families, making sure that families know what the expectations are and that you have good gear to make sure that families are supported. And then there are so many different activities. It doesn't always have to be getting messy or climbing a tree, which are wonderful, wonderful things, but also sitting and listening to songs or eating a lot of snow. We do that a lot in Minnesota. I've had so much snow this season, and allowing for those things where you can and where it's safe for children. And then making sure that you do it year round outside, because that really helps children get a sense of place. And as long as you can provide safe places for them, and that if they're coming to your program, that you have kind of the expectations about gear well laid out, and that children are able to fully engage with the space. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about developmentally appropriate practices, and that means really just thinking about how old the children are and where they are in their development, and making sure that the activities that you do take that into account. So it's, it can be, climate change is a really big deal for all of us. And it is a very big deal for children, but they are not quite ready to hear about all of the intricacies of climate change and how humans are affecting it, but they are ready to start making a difference. And so thinking about developmentally appropriate ways that they can do that can go a long way to helping them become adults that continue to take action and continue to make the good choices in their life. So I just wanted to start and talk a little bit about composting. It's something that children are very excited about because, one, there's usually worms involved, and two, there's like trash and like the great stuff. And so they can get hands-on, they can see change happening. We do composting with worms, usually red wigglers or earthworms, but also with mealworms, which they can pick up and feel, and if they eat one or lose one, it's not that big of a deal because they're generally okay. And then having compost that you can have in or near your program so they can see what's happening outside with leaves, or where you compost a pumpkin. That can be a lot of fun for children to watch. It's also a great way to start a pumpkin patch in a place that maybe you didn't think one could grow. And then you can see some of the books that I put on this slide are made for toddlers and very young children. They're board books, and they just have some really simple things that children can connect to. And then there's recycling and making sure that, children are ready to recycle. Their minds want to sort things. That's something that young children are very, very good at. And we have all sorts of activities in the classrooms for children to sort things like shapes and colors. But recycling can be a really rich part of your curriculum if you allow for places for children to be able to do that. And have it in all of your spaces, so common spaces, inside, outside, making sure that children know this can happen and should happen everywhere. And then gardening experiences, there are so many wonderful resources and also a lot of a support in communities for gardening, whether it's community gardening or things on your playground. There's the farm to school movement that can help some programs with things, or the farm to childcare program. So there are so many opportunities for doing that. But making sure that when you're doing gardening or planting things, that you continue to keep your sustainability focus. So it can bother me a little bit when I see a science activity and it's growing a seed in a plastic bag or in a plastic cup. And it makes me a little bit sad that they didn't get that connection that, yes, roots are really fun to see, but also it would be worthwhile for conservation to grow it in something that is compostable, or maybe grow twice as many that you need and have children just take it out of the dirt and look at the roots and, and try and plant it and see, does it work again? What happens with plants if you disrupt their root system? There's a lot of really rich conversations that can happen from that, but not taking always let's put it in a plastic bag because it's easy. And so thinking about conservation in all of your routines with young children. And then understanding weather. Our weather is changing, and there are things that children are noticing. We've had, crocus sprouting in Minnesota in January, and that's a hard thing to explain. Children are like, it must be spring. I said, yep, you're noticing things about what happens in spring. I can't tell them that it's not spring, but it's also not spring. But the climate is changing, and we want children to notice that. We want to have those conversations with them about what they notice without discouraging them or without telling them that they're wrong. So making sure that children have time to be outside and notice things in weather and ask inquiry-based questions about, why do you think? Why do you think we already have that crocus growing? Oh, because it's been really warm. Oh, yeah, I've noticed that it's been really warm too. And then as they get older and can hold on to different information about what's happening, they'll be able to put that to good use. And then time and space for children to care for wildlife can be really rich in the city. It can mean squirrel feeders or bird feeders or, looking for raccoon tracks, but also there are things that sometimes as adults we're not super excited about, like mice or roaches, but children are. And so not shying away from those things. Just this morning, there was one of those large water roaches in the kitchen. And so I caught one, and the children will be very, very excited about. The teacher was not super excited, but the children will be very excited because they love when we can find those large ones. They come up from the sewers in Minneapolis sometimes, and it can make for an exciting exploration. So, and then, bird feeders and having children do things like refill them and watch who's coming, and they can do simple charting around who likes to eat what and how can we encourage more birds to visit, things like that. And then, if you have funds, things like trail cams can be super exciting for some children. I mean, it's all about variety. With young children, their interests can range from, worms to dinosaurs, and making sure that you offer children a chance to connect in lots of different ways. And then giving children opportunities to care for the land and make sustainable choices. They can do things like help clean up a trail or build gardens or make signs. They're super excited to engage in those things. So making sure that you have time for that. But while they're doing it, make sure that you allow time for play and for fun. So if you're going to clean a trail, and it's with young children between, I would say, 2 and 8, just plan that it's going to take 3 times as long as it would have if you had an older group of children, because they're going to want to play, and they're going to want to explore, and they're going to get off trail probably a little bit, and making sure that you have that so that children know that you care about them and you care about what we're doing, and that it doesn't have a timeline. Really, the goal is the connection. So I put a few resources there. The one on the left is the book that Julie Powers, she was the founding director at Dodge Nature Preschool, and I wrote, and it really is about making sure that young children have nature-based experiences no matter where they are. I'm originally from California and Nevada, and nature experiences look different in the desert and in the mountains. And so making sure that we have nature as accessible, whether you're in a city or in the rural areas. And then there are a couple of other books about young children's development that I put on there as well. And then the last slide is about the guidelines for excellence. And I had the wonderful opportunity to work on this with NAAEE. And it's just a great resource for environmental educators about how to do developmentally appropriate practice and how to weave that into their program. So that's it. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Sheila. That was fantastic. And we have about 7,500 questions. So we're not going to be able to get to all of them, but let me just ask you one of the ones that came up, and then we'll save some time at the end. Celeste wanted to know, in terms of what do you do with those students where nature is not their thing? How do you keep them engaged? What are some of the things that you do?
Yeah, so I take turn to learn what is their thing. And sometimes their thing is art. That is something that I've run into. So I make sure to put things like easels on the playground, and because the lighting is great for art, but also color mixing, and maybe, putting some flowers near there so they can start to mix colors and think about how to match things up. And so not saying, we're not going to follow your interest, but we're going to follow your interest, but we're going to try and weave in this nature component into it.
That's great. And just one other, because it's such a good question from Casey about suggestions for how to best advocate for nature-based play in a community, especially in a community that might not be understanding all the benefits. What are some tips? And all of you can be thinking about that, because that's a really important one.
Yes, and I think some of it is really knowing the community and knowing the community well, because from my perspective, most communities already have a deep connection with nature. It just looks different. And so it could look more like for me, when I was young, my family did a lot of camping, but we also had every single birthday party happened in a park. And so when I think of birthdays, I think of being outside and being at a park and playing games. And so that can be a way that those families in those communities are connecting with nature. It just looks different. It's not always a hike or or overnight camping, but then allowing places for entry into that. So the school that I work at, we go camping with the families twice a year, and families can bring a tent, but there's also an indoor place. And so if they're not ready for sleeping outside, they can come and do all the fun parts, the bonfire, the walk in the morning, but also have the safety that they feel inside of a shelter.
Great, Sheila. Thank you. And we are going to move on to our last speaker, and our panelists have agreed to stay on an extra 10 minutes, and I hope all of you can stay on as well. Lauren is going to go next, and then at the end, we'll try and answer some of the many other good questions that have come up. And let me just quickly introduce Lauren. Last, but of course not least, Lauren is another brilliant thinker with a great background. She's the Director of Behavior Change Strategies at the nonprofit firm Impact by Design, and she specializes in helping organizations reach their conservation behavior change goals with their audiences. She's a PhD candidate in Martha Monroe's lab at the University of Florida, and many of you know Martha Monroe, and she specializes in conservation and environmental ed. She's worked for more than 10 years in the conservation field with zoos, aquariums, state and national parks, and environmental ed centers, and in 2011, she was awarded Environmental Interpreter of the Year by the Florida Park Service. We're so excited to have her. She has a bachelor's in psychology and a master's in natural resource management, and she's going to talk more about the connection between nature and conservation. So welcome, Lauren.
Thank you so much, Judy. And thanks for having me, everybody. And yes, so today I'm going to chat a little bit about how we can connect the dots between connection to nature emotionally and intellectually, and translating that into conservation action, particularly with adult audiences. And you can go to the next slide. Thank you. This is one of my most recent favorite quotes, and I think that this kind of sums up my last 10 years of experience as a practitioner in conservation, education, and interpretation. I imagine that many of you are joining today because you're wondering the same thing, like what can we really change with all of our efforts? Next slide. So whether I was a park ranger doing interpretation full-time or a conservation education manager at a zoo or working with aquariums, I've wondered, are all of our efforts really working? And for me, what I mean by that is, do all of our efforts translate into actual conservation of our natural resources? So the goals of some of your programs might differ with adults and even with children and adolescents as well, of course. And some of these goals might include taking conservation action or changing someone's attitudes about the environment or something that they've been wary of before, like snakes, or even just helping them connect to nature on that multidimensional level that Dr. Chawla was talking about. Sometimes it's hard to know if our overall goals are working. So what does connection to nature have to do with conservation action? Next slide, please. So we'll take a look at what the research does show us about adults. So what we do know, even though it can be really hard to measure environmental behaviors, what we do know is that people that are more connected to nature tend to be happier and have more positive outlook on life and more affective values. They tend to act in more environmentally responsible ways and exhibit more pro-environmental behaviors. So this is really exciting news and highlights why it's so important for us to focus on this multidimensional aspect of helping our audiences connect with nature. Next slide. So how do we do that with adults? There have been some really great tips today from Sheila and Luis with children and with adults as well. So I'm hoping to bring to the table some of my tips as a practitioner that I've used with achieving this goal of trying to help our busy adults in our lives today connect with nature. And before we move on to the next slide, I'd like you to take a second, just a moment, to think about something that's really important to you that you value. And I'll give you a moment. You can put it in the chat box if you'd like, or just think about it to yourself or write it down. But take a second to think about something that you personally value. Okay, great. You can go to the next slide. So in interpretation, we call values something termed universal concepts. So I'll be using the term value and universal concepts interchangeably. But likely we had some things in common when you thought about things that you really value. And that might have been family or science or religion or a specific place. or just, it could be so many things, but there are a few that we know from research that adults, particularly American and Canadian adults, have in common that we can use to help our audiences, particularly adult audiences, emotionally and intellectually connect with the natural resources that we want people to conserve. And so I'm going to highlight a few of those for you here. Some of these values are a little more obvious than others, but the important thing about these values and universal concepts is that if you can't get your audience out in nature, you can still help them emotionally and intellectually connect with nature. And these are some ways that you can do that. So highlighting the interconnectedness that we have with the natural world is a really important way that adults can emotionally and intellectually connect with nature. Thinking about protection and family. Most of us as humans on this planet can resonate with this value or concept on some degree because we know what it's like to feel threatened or to want to protect something or someone or to want to provide for our own and our family. And so tapping into these values with your messaging when you're interpreting a resource can be a really great tool, no matter what someone's political affiliation is today in this polarized world or what their cultural background is. There are some universal values that we all can understand and tap into when we talk to our audiences about the natural world. What we do know from the National Network for Ocean and Climate Change Interpretation, and we did some research with more than 10,000 adults and found that protection and responsible management are values that resonate really well with American and Canadian public when trying to help them connect with the issues of climate change and sea level rise and a few other environmental issues. So helping let people know, your adult audiences know that we're all interconnected on this planet as neighbors in one habitat, and that we all understand we want to protect each other, and protecting our natural resources is how we can protect our families. And that it's just the right thing to do to responsibly manage our natural resources, not only for those of us around today, but for future generations. These are some tools that you can work into some of your messaging. And another really great tool that we touched on earlier, and you can go ahead and click next, is helping people find similarity with the natural world and themselves. And so there's been some great chat in the box about empathy and how we can use empathy as a tool to connect with nature. So help reveal, use those Tilden's principles of interpretation and reveal to your audience how they have more in common with the natural world than they might think, so that we don't create this sense that the natural world is an other and we're separate from it. And you can do that through images like you see here of helping an audience connect with the idea that a male lion and his son have similarities to a human father and son. And those tools are just little nuggets, and I'm happy to provide more resources on that of how to use some values and universal concepts in your actual messaging and your programs to help people emotionally connect with nature. So tips on the ground. These are some of my favorite go-to tools when doing adult environmental interpretation or education. One thing that works really well is dedicating, one of the speakers mentioned earlier, don't over-program, leave some space for people to explore. And these rules apply to adults as well. Give them a moment. Sometimes people don't realize when it's time to just be quiet and look around and think about what you've said or what's happening in front of them. So just dedicate some exploration time, or even if it's just a few moments to look and reflect. Another really great thing that you can do to help build self-efficacy in nature for people who aren't as used to being outdoors is to give them a task. Say, go find a photograph with your phone of something you don't know what it is, or something that freaks you out that you're scared of, or something the color orange. Just help build their self-efficacy, because sometimes when people are in nature and they're not used to it, the novelty of it all can overpower that emotional connection. And then the emotion becomes about being overwhelmed or just confused about what they're seeing. So give them a task and have them go out and try it out themselves. Another tool you can do is to have them reflect. Journaling doesn't mean it has to be in a book. Journaling and reflection time can take the place of coming back together and sharing something interesting that they found, or something they felt resonated with them or that they were connected to on some level. You can have them share in a group, and when they can hear some of their peers talk about their feelings about being connected to nature, that can help normalize some of the feelings that we have in nature and overcome some of the fears that we have when we realize that it's okay to be afraid or to be confused. We all feel that way. And then you as the educator or interpreter can help them relate to what's happening so that it's not scary. You can have people come to aha moments on their own. And I love this tool. Whether you're at your aquarium and you're looking at the dolphin exhibit Have them take a minute to watch them swim and ask them what they think is happening. How do you think the dolphin stays underwater? What do you think these two dolphins are doing when they come and interact with each other? Give them something they can't Google by letting them think and feel and emotionally connect on their own. And that's a really important part, just as we've mentioned in the other two presentations, that knowledge is not enough to help take people to conservation action. And it's really easy to remember facts, but people find it hard to forget how you made them feel or how they felt in a place. So help foster those emotions and feelings through aha moments is a really great tool. And I know this can be hard, and sometimes it's a leap of faith to try out kids' activities with adults, but from experience, I can tell you that it's nostalgic and they love it. Test it out with some friends or coworkers first, and not every child adult will work well with kids, but it taps into something, especially for adults that used to be outside as children, that helps reinvigorate that passion that they had. So when you're thinking about what your program's goals are, sometimes your goals might be connection to nature, or building skills, or changing attitudes, or increasing knowledge. But if your goal is to change behavior, something that's really important to keep in mind is not to say, here are the 10 things you can do to save this national park, or here are the 20 easy things you can do today to save the earth. Although we think we like a lot of choices, what behavioral science shows us is that focusing on one ask or action is the best thing you can do with your adult audiences. So once they've connected emotionally with their resource and they've gotten to see your passion and hear your story of why you're connected to nature and how that came to be, ask them to do one thing, whether it's take a pledge or volunteer, attend an NAAEE webinar. Pick one thing and focus on that. That's an easier outcome to measure, and it's easier for your audience to grapple onto rather than having so many things to pick from to do. And so along these lines, I have a really exciting announcement to tell you guys that Judy touched on. We can go to the next slide. Myself and a group of people from actually all over the world, including NAAEE, the University of Florida, and even a few people on this webinar today are working on a guidebook that'll help you assess if you're meeting your program's goals. And so the point of this guidebook is to provide a tool so that you can take a look at the options that are available to you to measure your program and pick the right tool to measure connection to nature in your audience. This guidebook will have a sort of a decision tree or a filter so that you can choose a tool based on the age group or the length of your program or your goals, or if you prefer qualitative versus quantitative data analysis. And it'll recommend, there's even a tool that just has one simple question that you can use to get a snapshot of how your audience feels connected to nature. So there's a really nice diversity of tools here. And we're even going to provide information step-by-step on how to analyze the data that comes out of what you collect. So we're working on the draft now, and you can expect this to come out for you in 2020, and I hope that you'll find it really useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. That was fantastic. And we do have a lot of questions, so I'm going to give you one on your own, and then I'm going to open it up for all the speakers. Amy talked about some of her colleagues are discussing compassion versus empathy in relationship to how children connect with nature. And I don't know, Lauren, if this is your area of expertise, but is there, they believe that the compassion for nature will lead to more environmental action than focusing on empathy. And I wondered if you know more about the empathy compassion research that's out there.
Sure, I shared a tool in the chat box from the Seattle Aquarium that I love, and we'll try to make sure you guys get that again later. And so it doesn't focus so much on the difference between compassion and empathy, but it does help understand the role that empathy can play in conservation action and how to walk that fine line, as many of us do as practitioners and researchers, between empathy and anthropomorphism, and trying to focus more on that empathy side so that they can build some compassion towards wildlife. So I would like to point you guys to that tool, and we'll send it out again, but it is in the chat box more towards the front, or you can just Google Seattle Aquarium Empathy, and there's a really great, beautifully laid out, thank you, Kristen just put it back in the chat box.
Thank you.
A tool that might touch more on that.
Yep. And if you don't know Kathy Yoon, who is at the Seattle Aquarium, although she's leaving, she's done a lot of work on empathy, and she would be really helpful to connect with as well. Okay, for all the panelists, and thank you all for staying a few extra minutes because we do have some great questions. Carlos asked about many immigrants are from big cities and see nature as a luxury for the children. How can you reach the families of people that are you know, immigrants to cities living in urban areas, what are some techniques and tools and ideas? Anybody? Sheila, Luis, Lauren.
Well, I want to say something with our Growing Up Bolder project, where we involve children and teens working with city agencies on different environmental and place-based projects. We have a commitment that at least half of our work is going to be focused on children from low-income families, historically marginalized groups, or children with disabilities. And we find working with families that, again, I think as Sheila was saying, you need to take time to get to know them, and make that time part of your planning and your program space. But we always find we can go back, and parents and grandparents, they do have memories of being connected with nature in wherever they've come from, or whatever their culture is, and you know, giving them time to access that and bring that back up. It really creates an opening for kind of how to go forward with them and their children.
Thanks, Luis. Sheila?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I also think giving time in your community for them to share their stories, and whether it's a story about, you know, when they were young and, you know, and they would go to collect water from a certain place, or whether they did gardening, or whether they kept goats or different animals near their home. There's a lot of expertise, and I think it is really allowing time in your community for those stories to come up. So, you know, having like a story contest, or having a night at your program where you can have a bonfire and ask people to share stories with each other about, you know, the stars that they grew up looking at, or any of those different things. Even collecting rocks. It doesn't always have to be plants or animals. It can be so many different things that they might experience in nature. So many people grew up near mountains, and that's another place that they can connect, how they found their directions and how they knew where they were going.
Yep, that's great. Lauren, anything you want to add, or should I go to another question?
No, I think they nailed it. Feel free to move on.
Okay, well, we'll do 2 more questions and then we'll wrap up. Amy had asked about how fine arts and music skills can be developed through unstructured nature play. And we also had a question of, can you talk about, is unstructured nature play more beneficial than nature play with a mentor? Can you talk about that, the unstructured versus nature with a mentor? So art and music skills through unstructured nature play, and then also just the question of unstructured nature. Anyone want to tackle either of those?
I can start with the unstructured. Okay. Is that good? Okay.
Yeah.
So I think having an adult there that you can connect with, and that can give you stability and you know, help you be there, but allowing children to have some time that's unstructured. When we generally think back to our own childhood and what were those exciting moments that we remember, our parents were hardly in the story, right? It's that time where we have those deeper connections. Usually our adults knew where they were. I suggest that the adults always kind of know where the children are, but that you allow them to have a little bit of that autonomy and make those connections on their own, but also having time where you can go out and see that discovery and they see your enjoyment and passion in the environment. I think both of those are very, very important, and allowing time for both of them to happen, I think, is the best case scenario.
Right. Yeah, and if I can jump in, I think that what people are hearing from all 3 of us is that importance of allowing time to kind of go with a child or go with an adult, let them kind of find what interests them, what matters to them, and let them focus on that. But, you know, one of the most critical aspects of human development is this thing called joint attention, and it's kind of part of everyday life. We often forget how formative and important it is, and that's when two people or a few people are focusing on the same thing at the same time, and all that communication that goes on between them. I mean, that's how people are learning within their social group and within their culture what to pay attention to and how to respond to it. And certainly adults can do that with children, as Sheila said, share their own fascination and excitement for something. But I think one of the greatest gifts that we can give children, in addition to time for their own unstructured exploration, is to be willing to go where they're pointing, to what they are paying attention to, and to kind of validate that, yes, that's worthy of attention, and you're fascinated by it, and I'm willing to go into that fascination with you.
Thank you. Great answers. We could do this for 7 or 8 hours. The last question we're going to tackle here, and then I'll explain what we're going to do and we'll wrap up. Sarah asked if there are any tips on how to connect employees with nature in a corporate environment where time to actually be immersed in nature is not seen as a priority or a value. So the corporate side of the world. Lauren, do you want to tackle that one? Putting you on the spot.
Wow, that's a really great question. Sure, I could do that. So connecting to nature in the corporate world, oh gosh, there's so many different tools that you could use. One tool that I've liked in some of the places I've worked are walking meetings. So getting together with my boss or my team and walking while we talk outside instead of doing your traditional sit around the table with our laptops and et cetera, et cetera. And that's something that whether or not we were intending to connect with nature, we inherently did, because we started noticing changes in the trail we would take, or you would start to notice a new bird is around, the seasons are changing, or you might stop and share something, a moment with each other, even as adults, that was really moving, you know, like seeing a snake run over and feeling sad together about it, or seeing a flower blooming just full of bees. So I think that's a really easy thing that doesn't cost any money. If you can, if you're in a city, you can walk around and take a look at the pigeons. I mean, there's so many, somebody in the chat box was mentioning all the things you can watch pigeons do and draw connections to the way people behave, the courtship behavior and things like that. And another last nugget too that I'll leave is a tool that I love with adults called Photo Voice Project. So having adults, everybody has a camera, have them for a week go out and take pictures outdoors. Maybe it's a photo contest for the office, or maybe you're just trying to find a cheap way to get new office decor with some new pictures, but encourage them to go out, give them a question, you know, what does nature mean to you? Or find something in the natural world that you remember as a child. Let them take pictures and bring it back to the office and share it as an icebreaker. That can be a really fun way to help the corporate side connect with nature without remodeling a building or without doing anything too out of the box. So baby steps, and then you can just remodel the whole building to look like there's real wildlife inside, and then it's a whole nother step though.
That's great, Lauren. And I'm just going to give everybody, all of our panelists, one more chance to give a final thought, and then we'll wrap up and we'll tell you how we're going to answer the other 7,000 questions. So, Louise, do you want any final thoughts for everybody?
Well, what strikes me is in all three of our presentations is how we talk about, we're talking about the same thing. And I think, as Lauren said, that very similar activities, the same activities, they're working across these age spans.
Yeah, that's great. Sheila.
I just am so glad to be a part of this community where we continue to think about how to engage. There are so many great questions. I hope that the resources that we share are really helpful, and I'll make sure to add a couple more about art and nature, because that is something that my family has been really passionate about, especially photography, but also painting and different things. So I'm super excited to keep engaged with this, and I'm looking forward to the next webinar.
That sounds great. And Lauren?
Yeah, my last little nugget for everyone is to try to give your audience something that they can't Google. We can find information and knowledge as much as we want now. It's so easy, but creating authentic experiences that make them feel something is the way that we can move them from connection to nature to conservation action.
Thank you all so much. We really could have gone on for a lot longer. And what we're going to try and do, first of all, we will share the recording and the resources. And thanks to Kristen and Colby and Heidi and all of you for sharing tips and tricks and resources. we will get that back out to you so that you all get a chance to get that connection. We also will see if our wonderful panelists will help answer a few of the additional questions that have come in, because a lot of good thinking and a lot of good questions here. And the good part is there is so much interest in this, and a lot of people wanting to know what is the research behind what we're doing. And so many of you have this. So thank you all so much. So there'll be more on that. Just wanted to let you know we do have upcoming webinars on April 17th. We're going to be talking about inspiring conservation action with Nicole Ardwin from Stanford and others. So that will be great. We'll have some other webinars focusing on engaging communities using the guidelines for excellence. We're going to be talking about statewide EE assessments, and in the future, civic engagement, storytelling, citizen science, and so much more. And a number of you had questions about citizen science, so we also will try and answer those. Just wanted to mention to everybody that's still on the line to please get your proposals in for the 48th Annual NAAE Conference in Lexington this October. It's going to be a great gathering, and I think our 3 panelists are going to be there, I hope. And you'll have a chance to meet them all in person if you don't know them. It's just a great lineup. So thank you all for joining. Thanks to Kristen and Colby for helping with the technical support, and Heidi for helping us with our partnership here and kicking this off. Thanks everybody, and thanks again to all of you for joining and for the great insights and questions. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Take care, everybody.